You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford, Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have one of my favorite thriller writers back on the show today. It's Karin Slaughter, and she has a brand new book. It's called The Silent Wife, and it's the 10th Will Trent book. And I'll tell you what, if you are not reading Karin Slaughter and don't have a rack of her books on your shelf, I don't know what you're doing with your life. Welcome back to the show, Karin.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Did I hear recently that this is your 20th anniversary as a published author?
I know. I started when I was 2, so that means I'm 22 years old.
Makes perfect sense.
It's crazy. And in a lot of ways, the pandemic has given me a useful example of how it feels because, it was February and now it's suddenly August. Right. And that's how it feels like when I look back at the books. It just feels like time has gone by that quickly, but also that slowly in a weird way.
My wife and I were talking the other day, and it seemed like March was 180 months long, and it was just never going to end. And then we went from the end of March to now it's August, just bam,
it's crazy.
Overnight. It is. It's so bizarre, so bizarre. So Karin, with this being your 20th book, do you feel like as an author that you have hit sort of a stride in your creative process? That writing books is an interesting pursuit because no matter what you've accomplished, when that new book is beginning, it's just you and the blank page all over again. Do you feel like it's getting any easier for you?
Well, there's a couple of questions in that question. So from the authorial standpoint, I feel like I'm learning something new with every book. I don't want to write the same book over and over again. That's never been the type of writer I want to be. I'm not,
Sure.
I'm not doing Cabot Cove mysteries, even though I love those. But for me, I want to always be talking about something new, embracing new stuff, new social issues, that kind of thing. So in that way, I feel a confidence as a writer to talk about these issues because I know there's an audience for it. And I know that there are people who feel like I do and, who dig what I'm doing. But the other side of that is like from a professional point of view. And I do feel like I've hit my stride after 20 books because I have the thing that most authors don't have the luxury of having, which is I'm pretty darn sure they're going to keep publishing my books for the near future. And that gives me, some kind of relief, actually, that because being a working writer who supports herself only from writing, that's a very rare thing to be able to do. And I feel so fortunate I can do it. And, that takes an additional level of stress off, and not to relate everything back to the pandemic, but, people like us, we can do our jobs from home. And
Right.
So, yes, this is extremely stressful, what the entire world is going through right now. But I look at my life and think I'm very lucky. I can do this from home. I have no worries at the moment financially. And, yes, I'm scared of this virus. It's horrible, but I don't have that added stress. And I feel that way about my career, too, as I just think that part of it, worrying about my publisher never wanting to publish me again, at least for the next few books, I'm not going to have to deal with that. So it opens up an opportunity for me to write and be creative in a way that maybe that stress might impinge upon.
So sorry about that, folks. We just had a power outage and things like this happen, but Karin is back with me. Karin, you were talking about kind of how this pandemic is affecting folks and creative folks in particular. This really, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about this myth of the starving artist and how, we always hear that people, especially creative people, need to stay hungry and need to always be striving for something. But you were saying that as a writer with 20 books under her belt and a 20-year career, that you are now in a place that you don't have to stress about that sort of thing. Continue what you were saying, but what do you think about that and that myth of the starving artist?
Well, I think I'm extremely lucky that I have this ability to do this. And, honestly, I was watching this thing on Edith Wharton the other day and Henry James. And, Henry James was critically acclaimed and Edith Wharton was considered extremely commercial. And she had been writing dense novels and not very happy with her sales. And Henry James said, write what you know. And she started writing books about New York society. She was a really wealthy woman from a wealthy family who married a wealthy man. And she wrote about those manners with an insider's perspective and was able to support herself financially. And it gave her a freedom that not just writers have, but women did not have back then. She was able to support herself completely if she needed to. And I think not having that financial burden takes a lot of pressure. It reminds me of something my friend Harlan Coben told me. We were in Amsterdam, of all places, and we had both just arrived on flights and we were exhausted, and we went for a walk to try to shake the jet lag. And Harlan said, the problems you have when you're successful are much better and easier than the problems you have when you're not. And that was really like, oh, wow, you're absolutely right about that. So I do feel extremely fortunate that I'm able to do this. But I will say that I never was allowed to be a starving artist, because when I graduated high school, my dad said, I love you. You can do more than anything. You can do exactly what you want with your life, and I will support you in every way except financially, and you can never move back home. So that was a kick in the butt. And I did a lot of jobs. I painted houses. I was an exterminator. I owned a sign company. So I did a lot of different things to support myself, pay my way halfway, as my father reminds me, through college. So, it's a good place to be, but I think it was also a struggle to get here, and I'm mindful of that every day.
Do you feel like those kind of disparate jobs that you did and things that you pursued to support yourself and to find your way, do you feel like that those things have fed into the writer that you are today?
Absolutely. When you're a house painter, you meet a lot of crazy people and you're in their homes for days at a time. So you see a lot of things that probably even their friends would never see. Mostly that they're incredibly filthy and they don't clean enough. But as an exterminator, now this was a job my sister got for me with this guy who was a really great, extremely laid back guy. I later found out he was laid back because he was high all the time. But I would just ride along with him in his van, and he would tell stories about being an exterminator. And then we'd get to a house and he'd give me the equipment to go run around and spray things. And he would pick a fat check or fat envelope of money up off the counter, and then he would throw another envelope down that looked like it had something in it, and he would say, I always leave blow pops for my customers. And that made sense because he would eat the blow pops, the hard candy shell with the really bad gum that sticks to your teeth in the middle. Right. Well, one day, one of those envelopes broke open and it was actually cocaine. So I was unwittingly a drug mule, I guess, or I was part of a drug front. Thanks, sister. But you learn a lot of things from people like that. And I have friends who have gone to jail or prison, and I think it's important, especially if you're going to write crime, to be out in the world. And so I definitely, when we're not under lockdown orders, I definitely try to be out there seeing people, talking to people, and I'm always taking notes in my head for possible stories.
And I'm sure none of those people or stories have found their way even remotely into your books.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, what I realized is I pick up a lot of people's bad habits from being in airports. It's sort of like the visual internet, being at a gate in an airport, and people will take off their socks and click their toenails, or they'll put lotion on their stomachs, people just do really crazy stuff at airports. So I really miss watching that insanity. And I never thought I'd miss an airport the way I have lately.
Well, another thing that's interesting with your 20 book and 20-year career is that this is the 10th book in the Will Trent series. What is it about Will that readers have latched onto and that want to come back to see what else is going to happen in this world? But what has it done for you as a writer to have this continuing series, to get to write in this world and to continue this meta story?
Well, I love writing about Will. He's a guy who's had a very troubled past. He has a disability, and I purposely wrote him as a hero with a disability because I thought that was important, and it was something that I wasn't seeing. He has dyslexia, which is something that's in my family. But let's just look at the hard facts. Like me, most of my readers are women, and in fact, 85% of all fiction buyers are women. And this is across the board: thriller, romance, everything, historical fiction, name it. And I think what they like about Will is that he is a man who respects women. And it seems like such a small thing to say, but I think a lot of my readers in some parts of the country feel like, they're not listened to, they're not respected, their ideas are not respected. And, it's as simple as something I saw on the golf course, where it was a group of young kids, like high school kids, and 3 boys and 1 girl, and they were playing a scramble. And basically, it's a bit complicated, but whoever has the best shot, all the players get to tee up from that shot. And several times this girl had the best shot, and the boys completely ignored her, and they went with the lesser shot because they just assumed that she wouldn't have the better lie. And that's just like the kind of thing. I met her eyes, and we kind of rolled our eyes and laughed, and I thought, that is going to happen to you your entire life, whether you're on a golf course or in a boardroom or whatever. There's always going to be a guy or a group of guys who just thinks because a woman did it, that isn't valid. That doesn't matter as much. And I do think that's changing, but it was very disheartening to see these 15, 16-year-olds picking up on those same habits. Now, I was at a country club, so that explains a lot. But, I do live in a fairly progressive city. Atlanta is extremely diverse and progressive. And I thought, gosh, if that's happening here, God knows what it's like in the suburbs.
Want to grow as a writer and take your writing to the next level? Give ProWritingAid a try. ProWritingAid is a grammar checker, style editor, and writing mentor in one package. ProWritingAid will never replace a human editor. Rather, it helps you self-edit to a deeper level so that when you send it off to an editor, they will be able to focus on the meat of your writing and not spend their time fixing basic writing issues. ProWritingAid is the only platform that offers world-class grammar and style checking, combined with more in-depth reports to help you strengthen your writing. Our unique combination of suggestions, articles, videos, and quizzes makes writing fun and interactive. Writing can be grammatically perfect but still feel awkward and clumsy. ProWritingAid searches out elements like repetitiveness, vague wording, sentence length variation, over-dependence on adverbs, passive voice, overcomplicated sentence structures, and so much more. Nothing makes a writer lose credibility faster than spelling and grammar mistakes. Submit clean, error-free writing. Go to ProWritingAid.com and use code HANK20 for 20% off of ProWritingAid Premium. ProWritingAid. Check it out today. Right. You said that, and I find this an interesting statistic every time someone quotes it, that over 80% of readers are women. What can we do to get more men reading? Do you have any input on that?
Well, fiction readers, I would say.
Fiction readers.
But, one thing is, I'll tell you what, men who read are pretty sexy and interesting. And the fact that they're open to reading women and women's opinions, I mean, that's a good sign for a woman if you're looking for a partner. That, and does he like cats? But I think part of the problem is you see it happen in schools where boys who read tend to be ostracized, and they're going to reward the boy who's the physically dominant boy. And that has not changed that much. I mean, it's lacrosse now or soccer instead of football, but it's just this dynamic where physical prowess is rewarded more than mental prowess. And I have a lot of friends that I'm in touch with from high school, and the ones who married the jocks generally ended up very disappointed. The ones who married the guys who thought computers were cool and who could quote Monty Python, they're doing okay. They still have a lot to talk about. So,
there's something about people that peak in high school.
Yeah, but what I would say to change that is you just find a way to take away the stigma. I mean, young boys, and it's part of it's evolutionary. They're pack animals. They want to identify with other boys and be part of that group. And if it's not a reading group, they're not going to read because that's not what men do. And, we see this at all levels now of society right now, where some of these guys, if they had read a book or two when they were growing up, maybe they'd have a little more empathy or intelligence. But it really is strange to me because when I travel in Europe, for instance, my crowds sometimes are 50-50. There are a lot of men there, and reading is part of their culture. It's like a national pride in the Netherlands. Reading is just a fundamental part of their society, and books are so important to them. And, in a lot of these countries, they protect booksellers. The government does. They protect, you can't discount books. Here you could discount books to hell and high water. But in France, for instance, if you are a bookstore and you buy one book or 1,000, you're going to pay the same price as Amazon, as anybody else, because they want the quality of the book to be dominant. So, I think all of that goes into how maybe American men view reading as like a feminine art or something lesser than, because a lot of women do it. And I think the key to changing it is the key to changing everything, which is just equality.
Yeah. That's the dumbest idea ever, that books are feminine or masculine or whatever. And I hope that, Monday through Friday, we chip away at that a little bit on this show by exposing people to new writers and books and ideas, and we're doing our part.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in The Silent Wife, the new book, Will Trent book 10, what do we find Will getting himself into?
Well, a whole lot of mess. I don't know why. Will doesn't just say, I'm not going to be any more books, because the first chapter, something awful happens. I'm happy. I'm getting along well with my girlfriend, Sarah Linton. Life is great. And then boom, everything goes crazy. In this particular instance, he's been called to a state prison where there's been a riot and a brutal murder. He's there with his partner, Faith Mitchell. And they get to the prison, and there's Sarah Linton, Will's girlfriend. She's the medical examiner for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And they start investigating this murder in this prison, and an inmate comes to Will and says, I didn't do it. I'm innocent. Well, this is something that a lot of people in prison say. You don't find a lot of them saying, hey, I am so guilty. You should keep me in here even longer than the sentence I got. I'm just a bad person. That does not happen. And so Will's skeptical, but then he starts looking into it, and he starts thinking, wait a minute, this guy might be right. But worse than that, someone's still committing these crimes using the same MO this guy was accused of, and that person is still on the loose, and we have no way of catching him. And that's what really kicks off the book, is trying to find who's hurting these women and to stop them from doing it. But one of the big twists is that this inmate was put in prison 8 years prior to this point, and he was put there by Sarah's ex-husband, Jeffrey Tolliver. So that's just a whole can of worms for Will. You know, he's dealing with his girlfriend, and now he's got to deal with the ghost of his girlfriend's ex-husband, whose reputation as a police officer and a man looms large in the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
When you're dealing with a character like Will, who has 10 books behind him, do you find that is easier to start a new story? And easier is a horrible word choice. But they're when you're dealing with a series like that, it comes with some inherent benefits, like the world building. You can just kind of drop into the story because everyone should have been along for the ride and kind of understands. Of course, you need to bring new readers up to speed, but some of that is negligible as far as the world building. And I'm doing world building in air quotes here. But with the other side of that is, with a long running character, we know that nothing ultimately terrible is going to happen to Will, because there'll probably be a Will Trent book 11. And so do you ever feel hamstrung as a writer because you don't have that ultimate danger that you could put Will in? Or is it the inherent nature of having readers that come along for those stories one after the other? Does that become, do you understand what I'm saying? Is there a balance between, when writing a long running series, how do you weigh out the pros and the cons?
Well, you mentioned that Will is in jeopardy, but we know he's going to be okay. My Grant County series ended after the 6th book, and that character was not okay. So right. I would caution people not to trust that is something you can assume, that everybody's going to be okay, because people have bad stuff happen in my books, and I am not gentle with them. But, it is a kind of tightrope to write a new book. And if you're doing a standalone, you're right, you have to do all that world building and character development. But I would argue you have to do the same thing in a series novel, because you're going to have people who have never read a Will Trent book before. And so I've got to catch them up and fill in some of the blanks. And then I also have to do it in such a way that people who have read every Will Trent book, and who before The Silent Wife came out read the first 9 to get ready for it, I got to make sure that I am not making them bored or giving them too much information where they just kind of roll their eyes and say, yeah, we already know this about Will and Sarah. So it's a real tightrope to try to build that world quickly, or build the world of this book using details from previous books. Because, I am not someone who says, okay, well, you have to know every single thing about this character that I'm writing about. I'm just going to give you little bits and pieces and tastes of things that have come before. And if you're interested, you need to go back and read the books. But if you just want to read this one, you're right there in the story. And that is a tightrope to walk, because I guarantee you, if I spend too much time explaining Will's learning disability and what dyslexia is, I'm going to get a note from someone saying, you did this in book 3, 5, and 4. And I do not want you, I think you should stop doing this. And so I do have to be mindful of that.
Karin, your Grant County series and in the Will Trent books take place in Georgia. And, there's a definite Southern flair to your writing and to your settings. To hear some people talk, there's an entire genre that revolves around Southern literature, as opposed to, I guess, people in Connecticut, write Northeastern literature. I don't quite know. But do you feel like that is a thing, that there are particular stories, and that stories based in the South and written by Southern writers have a certain flavor, a certain flair to them?
I do, absolutely. And, in as much as someone like Mike Connolly writing about LA is so identified as a California writer, not just California, but Southern California writer,
Right.
or even Lee Child, Jack Reacher goes to a different town every time, but there are so many familiar touchstones to each town he visits. Even, when Lee is telling a story that takes place in France, there are familiar casts of characters that speak a universal language. But for me, there's definitely a Southern edge to my storytelling. And I love being from the South. I'm very proud to be from Atlanta. I'm not so proud of our governor at the moment, but our mayor is fantastic. And when I write, I'm very conscious that I'm representing this region and I want to show it warts and all for all it is. And, the fact is Atlanta is incredibly diverse. We have a lot of Fortune 500 companies here, more films and television shows are filmed in Georgia than anywhere else other than Los Angeles. And I think actually last year we had more than Los Angeles. So we're doing pretty well. So it's a really cosmopolitan area, and I want to write about that. I want to write about the diversity, in as much as I'm a white woman writing books, I don't want to, of course, be accused of cultural appropriation, but I want to show the city for what it is. We have 1 million Mexican Americans living just in the metro area in a city that has roughly 7.5 million people in that same jurisdiction. That's a very big, vibrant community that's had a major influence on the region. We also are a majority minority city. 65% of our population is African American. We have the largest African American middle class of any major American city. So there's a lot here to be proud of. And I want to write about that and show it for what it is. We're not down here sipping mint juleps and burning crosses in yards. It's a very progressive, forward-thinking area. And, the old joke is Atlanta is the only reason that Georgia is not Alabama. And I take that as a source of great pride that this city is so vibrant and forward-thinking.
Novellar is the best way to write a novel. Why? Quite simply because we've made it the easiest place to do it. Writing a novel is hard enough. Novellar takes care of all the logistical bits of writing a novel, just leaving that small matter of the words to you. It's a clean, beautiful writing interface with writing analytics, goals and streaks, advanced grammar checking, version control, day, evening, and night modes, and many other features designed to take all the stress out of writing. Tell us what you need and we'll build it. Together, we'll build a better tool. With a design-led approach, all the right tools that you need, Novellar saves all your words constantly, allows you to manage and order your novel easily. It's accessible from any device, desktop or mobile. It syncs to Google Drive and Dropbox. It allows exports in various formats, including ebook and more. It also has nice touches like allowing you to write both offline and online, unique for a web-based platform. Everyone needs help with their writing, from inspiration through to grammar checking, so we're doing our best to provide that support. We integrate that support directly into Novellar. Our advanced grammar checker powered by ProWritingAid does everything from spell check to style advice. Our writing courses include the incredible Tim Clare's Couch to ADK. We're really excited to offer all Author Stories listeners 30% off Novellar for a whole year. And it doesn't matter if you choose to sign up for the monthly or annual plan. You'll get 30% off. All you need to do is use the discount code HANK when you sign up. Novellar, Novlr. That's Novellar.org. Well, you brought up the subject of cultural appropriation, and I would love to touch on that for just a second, because I think, 2020 has, in a lot of ways, has just been a dumpster fire of a year. Just all kinds of things, and it's kind of become a joke. Well, who had this for, July of 2020. Did anybody predict this? And
Right.
it's just everything that can go wrong, it seems to have gone wrong. And we're now confronting a lot of things that a lot of people would have just preferred to go untalked about, and that sort of thing. And I think that a lot of writers are scared to broach certain subjects because, well, what if I do it wrong? What if I inadvertently say the wrong thing, or misrepresent myself in a certain way? And and thank God that lots of good stuff has come out of this year. But I think on the other side of that is some people are very afraid that they're going to do the wrong thing. How do you handle that? How do you straddle being a white woman and also writing very realistically about the city and the state that you live in and the things that do go on? How do you handle that?
Well, you're right. I mean, and there's a good scared and there's a bad scared.
Yeah.
And I think everybody should be a little scared, because, I mean, here's the thing. As a writer who has a platform, I would be mortified if I upset somebody. I mean, I just would, just as a human being. And if I made somebody feel bad, and I've always tried to be incredibly inclusive in my writing, whether I'm writing about Lena's sister who was in a lesbian relationship 20 years ago, or Lena and her sister, her twin sister, are third generation Mexican American, and I did that on purpose because I thought I don't want to be a white writer only writing white characters. And I liked the idea of her being an outsider, but also being an insider, because Lena's identity was as a police officer. She didn't really have a connection to her identity as a Mexican American because her mother died and, she was raised by an uncle. So she didn't really have that opportunity. But, I think we also are very quick to shut people down, and we don't give people the benefit of the doubt anymore. Now, there's certainly some old white guys who need to shut the hell up. I mean, let's just be honest. And, during Me Too, the height of Me Too, I would have all these white men say, oh, well, I have to be very careful now. No one likes me. I've fallen out of favor. And finally I said to one of them, look, dude, you've had 2,000 years, okay? Just step back. Or just this last month, I was doing an interview with a Belgian reporter, and he said, well, as a white man, I have to be very careful now, and I have to really think about what I say before I say it. And I said, so what? Welcome to being a woman or a minority,
Maybe you should have been doing that all along. I don't know.
That's your, wow, I have to think about what I say now. Who the hell are you, man?
Right.
But it makes you understand why they don't want to give it up, right? I mean, the patriarchy is fantastic. So, if you're part of the patriarchy, it's great. I mean, I wouldn't want to give that up. Everybody falling around me thinking that I'm terrific and that I'm smart and all these other things just because I'm a guy. Sure, I'll take that. And it's interesting because it cuts along all races, all societies, all institutions. And I think that, it's time for a reckoning. But I also worry a bit. I know when I was younger, and I sound like the worst old person right now, but oh my God, ACT UP and, women's rights and NARAL and, Planned Parenthood, all this. I was marching, I was screaming, I was signing petitions. I didn't eat grapes for 2 years because we boycotted grapes. I was just so into it. And now that I'm a little older, it's like, okay, well, I get people make mistakes. Bad things happen. You can use your voice effectively. And my God, I mean, Black Lives Matter. I don't know anyone who doesn't support that, but I wouldn't know anybody who doesn't support that, And, but I also support the police. And I also support dialogue. It's like if nobody is talking, we're never going to solve anything. And if people are terrified of opening their mouths because someone on Twitter, which is such a small percentage of the population, but some Yahoo on Twitter says you should be canceled or you should be this or that. That's just not a way to change anything. It's a way to make people scared and make them more entrenched.
Speaking of dumpster fires, I think Twitter qualifies sometimes.
It's a scary place. I won't go on Twitter. I mean, because you don't want me unfiltered for one. And also, I don't want my politics to interfere with people enjoying my book. Like a lot of people don't know how much I love cats and they're dog people. And if they knew that, they look at my books differently. I mean, I don't want myself to impinge on their enjoyment.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of sad, but we get a lot of requests from publicists and things like that about new writers and wanting to have them on the show. And if I encounter someone that I don't know anything about, I've started going over to Twitter just to see if they have a screed on there that I'd just rather not get involved with, and whether they be right wing, left wing, centrist, I don't really care. I just so maybe choose your words carefully. I don't know. Things have a tendency to come back and bite you in the butt these days.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody has a right to their opinion, but that doesn't mean everybody
absolutely do.
Doesn't mean everybody has to like it.
That's right. That's right.
So, but I do think just be careful and think about the fact that the person on the other end of this, you may not agree with them, but they're still a human being.
Yeah.
They still, and not everybody is 100% bad.
Yeah.
With very few exceptions, but I mean, just talk to them, ask them what's going on, figure out the way forward.
Well, and here's an idea. Instead of screaming about something on Twitter, maybe take your neighbor a book and share with them and start a dialogue. And maybe we can change the world a little bit at a time that way.
I think if people had to, instead of tweeting, before they tweeted something, if they had to meet the person they were tweeting about, they would never do it. They would just be too cowardly. Just the anonymity of it.
I think you're right. You're right. Well, speaking of the new book, you mentioned Will and his dyslexia earlier, and so right off the bat, we're dealing with a character that has some challenges. But not only that, Will is not a perfect person. He has I won't say moral ambiguity because it's not that, but he does make some interesting choices along the way. We've got 10 books worth of Will, and we get to see his character exposed pretty well over those 10 books. How important is it to write characters that are authentic? And maybe that's an overused word these days, but that feels real and doesn't feel like just someone out of central casting, the puff chest, good guy.
Yeah. That was very deliberate on my part because I'm not interested in perfect people. And I think our flaws define us, but how we correct or embrace those flaws gives us who the character is. And, Will is, one of the reasons I loved writing this particular book, The Silent Wife, was because the title also plays in with Sarah, because we see her 8 years prior to her being with Will, and she is furious with Jeffrey, her ex-husband, who cheated on her. And she's looking in the present, she's looking back at this period and thinking of all the mistakes she made with him. And one was she wasn't honest with him about some pretty important things. I mean, he absolutely did her wrong in many ways. There are two sides to every story. But in the present day, we see Sarah trying not to make those mistakes with Will. And Will's go-to response to anything is just to be quiet. He doesn't talk a lot. And, in many ways, he's more like me than any character, because I'm not a big talker, believe it or not. I can go days without saying a word and be absolutely fine. And, a lot of times, you'll get a page of what Will is thinking, and then the dialogue is him saying, okay. So, Sarah doesn't hear what he's thinking. She only has what he says to go by. And, that's a really important part of his personality, but it's also extremely frustrating if you're in a relationship with him. And I don't mean just a sexual relationship, but his partner Faith comes up against that a lot, where she's just constantly trying to pull teeth to get him to talk to her. And he does that for understandable reasons. One of them is he grew up in state care. Another is with his disability in school. He was at school at a time before the Americans with Disabilities Act, when kids who had learning disorders were not recognized. The teachers were not given a foundation to understand that. And so his teachers did what happened to my own sister when she was in school. They just said he was lazy and not very smart. And, I saw this happen with my sister every year, where the teacher just wrote her off because she wasn't a fluent reader and she couldn't process information at the level the other kids could because her brain worked differently. So, Will's a kid who didn't have an advocate when he was growing up. He kept quiet because he was afraid of saying the wrong thing or getting the answer wrong. And, another part of that is his love interest for a really long time, Angie, was a horrible person. And if he told her something personal, invariably she would throw it back in his face when they were arguing. So, all of this goes into making Will the kind of guy who's not going to sit around and talk about his feelings. Whereas everything about Sarah makes her the type of woman who says, hey, we're going to talk this out, and I'm going to lock the door, and you're not going to leave the room until you tell me. So that's a endless source of discord between them that's great for me as a writer, maybe not so great for their relationship, but I love writing that dynamic.
The Silent Wife deals with some pretty heavy issues. And of course they don't feel like issues when you're reading because it's such a great story. But we've got a prisoner who might have been wrongly accused of something, and then we've got a serial killer, what looks like a serial killer on the loose. What were some of the things you were thinking about when you first started writing this book? Were those ideas of wrongful convictions and what that really looks like in the real world? Were you kind of trying to process those things when you started writing this book?
Well, yes and no, because honestly, the focus of this was the power that police officers have, especially in small towns. Because I knew I wanted to write about Jeffrey Tolliver, and I knew that I needed to find a new way to talk about him. And I looked back at the earlier Grant County books, and I thought, holy crap, he was pretty aggressive in his policing, and he bent and sometimes outright broke the rules. But he was the hero. He was a very typical post 9/11 American hero who, like Jack Brower, torturing the suspect to find out the location of the bomb. Right. Whereas Will is the person who's like, well, statistically, torture doesn't work, so I'm just going to talk to you and get the information, and I'll know it's true, as opposed to torture where you're going to tell me your mother was Hitler if that gets the pain to stop. So I was really conscious of the fact that police have so much power, and we root for them. And I'm saying we in the white community, of course, if you're a minority, you have a completely different experience in general, especially in small towns. But we assume that they're honest. We assume that they're right. And so we root for them. We root for Jeffrey to bend the rules and use physical tactics to get information because he's right. He's going to get the bad guy. He's going to put the bad guy away. He's going to protect people. And then I thought, well, what if he's wrong? What does that say about his tactics? It's sort of like the old paradigm of the death penalty. People will support the death penalty if you can assure them 100% that only people who are really guilty will be put to death. And, that a lot of people who still support the death penalty will say that, as long as they're guilty. Well, guess what? Sometimes the system is corrupt. Sometimes when you get in that system, you can't get out, no matter if you're guilty or innocent or whatever, So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. It ended up being prescient because, we've seen now that everybody has basically a video recorder in their pocket at all times. We've seen cops who use bad tactics, think they're going to get a good result, and end up doing the wrong thing, murdering someone. They've got the wrong people. I mean, just the other day, that poor family visiting D.C., two moms and their children, and the cops pull them over and put them face down on the ground because their license plate came back as a stolen motorcycle. You just think, what? That is not proportional. We've just lost all sense of proportion. And the police are very entrenched right now. And it's understandable because they feel under fire because they're saying, look, I'm not this guy. I'm not this horrible person who knelt on a man's neck until he died. I wasn't part of that group that broke into a house and shot a woman who was sleeping in her own home, and no, you weren't. But, it goes both ways because these same cops who are saying, look, don't profile me just because I'm a police officer. You think, well, don't profile me because I am an African American. Don't profile me because I'm a blonde woman driving in my car alone and the cop pulls me over, and my first thought is I'm not rolling down the window till I call 911 to make sure you're a cop. So it's that kind of thing where both sides are so entrenched and they're not having communication. And I think it's really important that we do talk about what the problems are in policing, because unless cops and people in society talk about it, we're never going to find a solution.
Do you find yourself in 2020 writing a police officer and writing stories about the process of justice and that sort of thing? Do you feel like your job has shifted, has gotten harder or easier because you do portray a character that is in a position of power?
Yeah, and I think the way Will gets around that is he doesn't present himself as someone in power. He's going to be leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets, paying very close attention to what you're saying, and if something else needs to be done, he's going to do it. But he's very hands off and very deliberate in his investigations in a way that Jeffrey was not. So he's definitely a response to Jeffrey, because if you look at Triptych, which is the first novel that features Will Trent, he's investigating a bad cop. And I did that very deliberately. There's this stigma against police officers who investigate police officers. And I mean, I can understand it, but come on, if there's a bad cop, you should want that cop gone. The fact is, statistically, 40% of all male police officers have been accused of domestic violence. 40%. Now, let's be really generous and say half of those are false reports, which is not true at all, and not even statistically likely. 20% of cops are guilty of domestic violence, and they're still wearing uniforms. They're still responding to domestic violence calls, to rape calls, to assault calls, and who they are is going to inform how they treat those people. And that those cops should be gone. They've broken the law, so they should not be enforcing the law. They should not be wearing badges. They should not have what is a remarkable amount of power, especially when you take qualified immunity into account, where police officers very rarely can be prosecuted, or that the unions protect them so that a cop who's a really bad cop can get fired from one police force, but then if the next police force that hires him can't get information on him. Every cop I know wants that to stop, but they're terrified. It's sort of like the medical field. A lot of doctors would like to, if they make a mistake, just say, I made a mistake and I'm sorry. But they can't do that because lawsuits and all that other stuff, right? Right. And they could lose their license in some cases. And, while some of them do deserve that, there's just no room for apology. There's no room for I did wrong and I'm going to do better. And I'm a firm believer in admitting when you screwed something up and promising that you'll do your best not to let that happen again.
But when you live in a system that that punishes, over and above for things like that, and especially a litigious society like we have, that I think that takes people that are good people with good intentions and forces them to to do things that are not in line with what they believe. And I think if you do that enough over and over and over again, you're going to have people that are jaded and that won't do the right thing, even in times where the punishment is not in proportionate. I think it changes people by living in a society like that.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I absolutely agree with you, but there are far less litigious societies that have racial profiling and overuse of police force and African Americans disproportionately targeted. I mean, you look at England's statistics, for instance, and England has a much more progressive police force than most of the countries that I can think of. However, there's still a disproportionate amount of African Americans who are imprisoned over there. Now, you think about the fact that I think the Black British population is 3 to 4%. I mean, there's something going on there. And I think we need to look at the underlying causes openly and, just kind of admit, especially a place like England. Thanks for slavery, you guys. Great idea. And the colonization and the creation of a brown or a black skinned person is lesser than. I mean, look what they did to India, for instance. And you just think, I mean, not to beat up on England, let's pull the Netherlands and Belgium and Germany and all these other colonizing forces in America, obviously. But I mean, we just need to look at our history openly and honestly and look at ways to change things now going forward.
Well, The Silent Wife is out, available everywhere now. And if you need a little bit of escape from reality this summer, while also challenging yourself to look at the world and the situations we find ourselves in maybe in a little different light, The Silent Wife is a must-have for your summer reading. Karin, we're going to put links to it in the show notes so you can get it in Kindle edition or hardcover or audiobook. However you love Karin Slaughter books, you can consume them in whichever format you prefer. If people are just learning about you, Karin, for God forbid, but want to dig into all of the great stuff you've done, where can they find you online?
Well, my website is KarinSlaughter.com, Karin with an I, or you can go to Facebook and find me if you want to see pictures of my cats.
I love it. We'll put links in the show notes where people can find those readily. And thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show, Karin.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Scribophile is a respectful online writing workshop and writers community. Writers of all skill levels join to improve each other's work with thoughtful critiques and by sharing their writing experiences. We're the writing group to join if you want to find beta readers, get the best feedback around, learn how to get published, and be a part of the friendliest and most successful writing workshop online. Improve your writing by receiving detailed critiques. Learn from a vast collection of free writing resources. Make lifelong friends in our busy community of writers. Writing is a solitary art, but that doesn't mean you have to be lonely. Lucky for you, there are thousands of writers on Scribophile every day, and we're a really friendly bunch. You've never seen a writing group like this one? Join Scribophile today at scribophile.community.